I'm excited to be here. Thanks the Sims Man Group for putting this think tank together. We've already heard some great speakers, and I'm going to talk today about social emotional learning in infancy, bodies, brains, and emotion. I'm trying to bridge to this period in early development, the first 3 years of life that's so important, and build on what Catherine talked about communication prenatally, and show you about the explosion of communication that happens postnatally after the baby can look into your eyes and feel you, touch them, and express visual emotions and so forth. So I want to talk about that a bit today. One of the striking things about human development is that, this is the disclosure. I have nothing to disclose. What I want to talk about is the power of social learning. Postnatally, our children watch what we do. They can finally see our bodies, not just feel us, and they have a drive to want to be like us. We're role models for our children starting in the preschool period, and as I'll show you here, even when they're sitting in the high chair and don't have language yet. Learning by imitating others is a fundamental mechanism for learning before there is language. And evolutionary biologists have thought for a long time what makes human beings so special. Human beings make art, they do science, we send our children to formal schooling, and while a lot of animals learn, no other animals do those three things, art, science, and create formal schooling. Well, how is it that the human brain can do this? And evolutionary biologists have argued that we use a special trick in human beings. We're born relatively immaturely. We're born into a social environment, and our brain is wired through social interactions, actually sculpted through the interactions we have. So we build our babies' brains, partly prenatally, as Catherine talked about, but certainly postnatally as well, as our family unit or culture interacts with the child. So I have been very interested in this idea of babies imitating us and have taken to brain science to look at the neural mechanisms involved. This is a baby wearing an EEG cap, and we have a simple box where if they press a button, it will make a sound. They watch an adult do it, and then they imitate, and we're taking brain data about what the neural mechanisms are involved in this very special ability of human infants to learn non-verbally by simply watching us. And we know that babies are prolific imitators. In fact, the most imitative creatures, children or young in the animal kingdom, you can know that by interacting with your own baby. If you're a mother and you have lipstick, the baby wants to dive into your purse and pick out that magic wand and put it on their lips because they see you do that all the time and they want to be like you. Favorite objects of theirs might be the key ring or a cell telephone. Why are these pieces of metal or plastic special to them? They're not special for evolutionary reasons. They're special because they see you handle them, and they become magic instruments for the baby. The baby wants to be like you and duplicate that. So we've been studying the neural mechanisms that underlie imitation. These recent 3 papers have shown what brain areas are involved, and we're able to show that the same neural areas are involved when the baby performs an action themselves and when they simply see you perform it. So we're looking at the coordination between perception and action, which is so important for social development in young children. One of the things we're beginning to look at as the basis of imitation is what babies know about their bodies. The skin is very important to babies. Ruth Feldman will talk about that a little bit here. She's one of the pioneers looking at this. And we're looking at the importance of not only skin-to-skin contact, but how the baby's body is represented in their own brain. Human beings have what's called touch hunger. We long to have our body touched and stroked. Skin-to-skin contact is important between mothers and their children. It's also important between fathers and their children. I have a picture at home of my wonderful newborn baby when she was a newborn sitting on my chest. Of course, I was asleep and the baby was asleep, and my wife took a picture of that. And as a new father, holding the baby skin to skin was very important. When I went over some of my friends' houses, I saw the very same picture in their houses as my house. In other words, one of the favorite pictures is being asleep, having your child on your chest to begin with. The particular aspect of this relationship that I'm looking at is we're calling neural maps, the formation of neural body maps. That is how the baby's body is represented in the baby's brain. And some of you may have seen pictures of this in textbooks. There's a homunculus inside your brain in the central region of your brain. I'm pointing to the central region here. It's bilateral on both sides. And your body is laid out in a very systematic way in your brain. It's called somatotopic organization. And that just means that it's organized in a topographic way in the neural tissue. Your feet are in the middle of your brain about here, and as you move from the bottom of your feet up to the top of your head, it goes laterally in your brain. So your hand is about here, and your foot is in the middle. A lot is known about how the body is laid out in the adult brain, and very little is known about neural maps in the infant brain. That's what we began to attack, and I want to show you some new data about that today and show you why that's important, because I think the representation of the body and the brain is one of the roots of empathy. It's a way that babies make a connection between self and other through their brain. So here's a picture of a 29-week-old baby's brain in our laboratory. And I wanted, if this pointer works, the hand region for the adult brain is right around here in an adult brain. People had not known before we took these 29-week-old babies into our brain imaging device, they hadn't known what the baby's body map looks like. So when I press this button, I'm going to turn on a film. It lasts about 10 seconds, showing the activation in the baby's brain, 29-week-old baby, when we touch their hand. And the red spots, of course, show the hottest activation. I want to show you what happens when we touch. So we're touching now. And that's activation in the hand area that we could predict is where the baby's hand should be laid out if their body maps were similar to adults. Now I want to rotate the brain, turn it around, because the baby's or the or the foot region is in the central part of the brain, down the middle of the brain. This is the inner hemisphere wall, and the foot region would be about here. So this is a first movie of touching the baby's feet. And boom, you can see there's activation is what we might think of as in the foot region. We're now mapping the baby's lips in the baby's brain, other parts of their body, and we're going to try to develop an infant body map in the neural tissue. It's a very exciting thing because we think it's a way that the babies connect self to other. The experiment we did after this was to show a baby a hand being touched, not their own hand, but through vision, watch somebody else's hand being touched. And what we discovered is the baby's hand area lights up when they see somebody else's hand being touched. The baby's foot area, different part of their brain, lights up when they see somebody's foot being touched. So a baby at 29 weeks is already able to recognize my hand is like your hand, my foot is like your foot. And this self-other mapping, this identity connection, I am like you, you are like me, we think is absolutely fundamental for social emotional development. Philosophers have talked about for a long time whether baby is born asocial, separate from another person, and they have to be brought in to register with another person. This research is saying no. Human babies, typical human babies, are born, recognize similarities between self and other, and processing themselves and other people similarly. Of course, the development of that remains very, very interesting, and we're pursuing it. But what I wanted to move to now is something else about emotional development. Babies are exposed to a lot of positive emotions, but they're also exposed to negative emotions, and we wanted to see how experiencing negative emotions affected the children's learning. So we're psychologists. We brought babies into the lab, and we wanted to, as we say, administer a negative emotion. Now, how did we do that? Well, we didn't get angry at the baby. What we did is have one adult become angry at another adult in front of the baby as the baby watched. So the baby was not being, have anything negative directed at them. And the particular experiment was this. We had an adult use a stick, a tool, to press a button that made a sound buzz. And we know from control experiments that the baby watches you press this button to make the box make a sound. If you give them the button and the box, they will pick up the stick and want to press the button. So they'll want to imitate what you do. But what we had is the first person show this action, and then an emoter on the side get angry at this person for doing so, as if it were a forbidden action, like putting your fingers in a wall plug or something, or touching a hot stove. You're not supposed to do this. The adult pressed the button, and the emoter got angry at the adult while the little 15-month or 18-month-old watched wide-eyed. So I want to show you this. This is a baby on the side.
See? Look at this. There.
Hi, Barrett. I'm going to sit here and read a magazine.
Okay, that's Nina. Nina's going to sit and read a magazine. Nina, look at this.
That's aggravating. That's so annoying.
Oh, I thought it was really interesting.
Well, that's just your opinion. It's aggravating.
So the little 15-month-old baby watches wide-eyed as one adult gets angry to another adult, but the important thing is what happens when the 15-month-old is given the toy to play with. In control conditions, they will imitate immediately. Watch what happens here. That's a phenomenon called social referencing in developmental literature. They're looking at the adult who had been sitting there with a neutral face now. That adult doesn't have an angry face expression on her. She's sitting there neutral. So we were interested in what are the mechanisms by which the baby is able to self-regulate, not do this action. And we think it's a pretty interesting mechanism. So a easy way of explaining that we found was not exactly right is that it was simple contagion. The baby saw anger in the room and they became upset because they had seen anger. We know it's not something that simple, because we had the exact same thing. Nina came in the room, was angry at the adult, and then Nina got up and walked out of the room. She just left. And then we gave the baby the stick, and what the baby did is pick up the stick, look to make sure Nina was out of the room, and then push the button. So it wasn't a matter of contagion that the baby was just upset. We did another experiment where we had Nina get angry, and then Nina turned her back, and she didn't watch the baby. Then when Nina had her back turned, the child was given the stick, and they would also do the action. So it isn't just that they had become upset by the action, by the emotion, because we controlled for that, but rather that the person who had been angry at that action was now in the room and watching the baby. So the little 15 and 18-month-old babies are able to keep track of the person's emotional history. This person gets angry when they see that action, and now they're looking at me. They may get angry at me, and therefore I'm not doing that action. Now that's an amazing integration between visual perception, knowing you are the target of somebody else's perception, keeping track of other people's emotion, and then inhibiting your own action. We think that's a very sophisticated and interesting thing for a 15-month-old to do. So there are three take-home messages from this line of work. One is that the babies as young as 15-month-olds have some degree of self-regulation, or what Stephanie Carlson may talk about later, and I think Ruth Feldman will talk about too, executive function, some ability to control their own behavior. The baby, after all, was inhibiting a prepotent act they wanted to imitate. They stopped themselves from doing it, and they only stop themselves under some circumstances, not others. So the first important point is some ability for self-regulation as early as 15 months of age. The second important point is we found babies were pigeonholing adults. They were recognizing which adults were anger-prone. They began to project a personality on a person who became angry rather than other control groups we did where a person was simply interested in the action but not angry at them. And we demonstrated this by having Nina get angry at several toys in a row, 3 toys in a row that she became angry at when you did the actions. And then there was a 4th toy that was a novel one. When the adult did the action on this 4th toy, the emoter, Nina, did not become angry. Did not become angry at that action. Then we gave the novel toy to the baby to see if the baby would imitate, and the baby had a problem. The baby looked at the toy, wanted to imitate, looked up at Nina, who had a history of becoming angry, looked longingly at the toy, looked at Nina again, and then inhibited their imitation. So they began to label this person as an angry-prone person, even when it was a prospective action, a novel action that this person had not become angry at. So you can begin to see how that may play out in the real world. If father becomes angry, to just use an example, at a child many, many times in a row, we believe that the baby is taking data, they're taking names, taking statistics of what emotions go with what person. And they're developing those emotional files as early as 15 months of age. The third thing that I think it's relevant to is developmental clinical psychology. Ken Dodge and other psychologists develop a concept called hostile attribution bias, which means that some children in preschool, elementary school have this syndrome, have this phenomenon called hostile attribution bias. They seem to treat new people that they're interacting with, that they have no evidence how that person will respond emotionally. They treat this new person as a potentially going to criticize them or give off hostile or negative signals. So in other words, the child has a theory of the world, a personality theory that a new adult comes into the world is likely to be hostile. And that, of course, has cascading and often negative consequences for the child. So we're thinking of the episodes that you see here, how a baby responds to repeated episodes of somebody being angry as possibly the origins and informative about this clinical syndrome called hostile attribution bias. Now I want to move to music, something again that Ruth Feldman has done a lot of research on. I'll talk about our novel approaches to this in the next few slides. Music, of course, is very important. Aristotle had talked about the importance of music in education, perhaps for building moral character in young children. And Schopenhauer has a wonderful quote saying, "Music stands alone, quite cut off from all the other arts. It is so entirely and deeply understood by people in their inmost consciousness as a perfectly universal language." Perfectly universal language. Wonderful phrase. And as a psychologist, I'm working with a person named Tal Chen-Rabinowitz, who's a scholar, a Fulbright scholar that came over to Israel to work in our lab. We began to look at a particular aspect of music. In fact, she thought that synchrony, moving your body in synchrony with other people, was one important aspect of music, an important aspect of the musical experience for our little children. So we did a study with 4-year-old unfamiliar peers. They had never met each other before. They came into the laboratory and we assigned them to different treatment groups. One was a baseline group where they just said hello to each other and then did a series of tasks. The tasks are important ones I'll talk about. The other 2 groups were one where the children were swung on the swing in synchrony with one another, and another group where they were swung, but they were out of synchrony with one another. So we were able to give them a synchronous experience. We're extracting from music and playing music together, which has a lot of other important features as well. We're extracting just the feature of moving your bodies together or being in synchrony in an experimental way to see how important that was. And the dependent measure that we used was children's cooperation. Tal Chen is interested in promoting world peace, and she thinks music and synchrony is going to help children cooperate with one another, be more empathetic with one another, and act in pro-social ways. So we measured particular aspects of cooperation, and we were able to show that having the synchronous experience significantly improved children's cooperation over asynchrony and over baseline. So the two cooperation tasks we did were very simple ones. If and only if children push these buttons together, cooperated, they had to do it at the same time, they got a visual event that was very exciting of a pop-up toy to them. That was this task. And this one is that there was a tube that got fed up and handed through a hole here. This person who's the giver is handing it. There's a plexiglass barrier here that prevents her from handing it directly to this person. She has to hand it underneath, and this child has to grab the toy. And what we found is that children who were in the synchronous condition, without any other verbal instructions, they had only met each other the same amount of time as the asynchronous, simply by having swung synchronously rather than asynchronously, we're able to now synchronize the behavior more exactly and coordinate a give and take activity which took some timing of feeding this underneath and grabbing the toy. So we're able to show increased cooperation in these young children, and we're excited by this and continuing to do many other pieces of research about it. So my last slide is simply a pitch that social learning and the social aspects of learning are incredibly important and central. A lot of textbooks in developmental psychology, I'm a developmental psychologist, so want to admit a flaw that we often have. In textbooks, there's often chapters that go about brain development, separate chapter on cognitive development, another one on social development, further one on linguistic development, then one on parents and family and culture. These are separate chapters. Well, the baby's brain is not organized as separate chapters. There's a whole brain, and the social brain seems to interact with and be very important for other aspects of development, such as cognitive development, as Pat Kuhl will talk about language development, and so forth. So the point of this article was to urge my fellow developmental psychologists to consider more of the whole child and the deep impact of social interaction, social learning, and the brain mechanisms about social learning, and how that feeds into this other aspects of development so vitally. And with that, I'll end. Thank you.